Hi everyone, this is Ben Stone with Transportation for America again. We are going to go ahead and get started. We're just a few minutes past the top of the hour. I'll just start by thanking all of you for joining us today, and also to apologize for my very scratchy voice, apologize for my allergies, and apologize for the brief pauses I'll probably take to sip on my tea so my voice stays with me. So hopefully you can bear with me. We are here to talk about the Minnesota Department of Transportation's Artist in Residence program, which we are calling the Community Vitality Fellowship. A couple of us on the call today, myself with Transportation for America. Hear from me first. I'll hand things over to Danya Sherman from ArtPlace America, and finally Jessica O with MnDOT. So I wanted to start by talking just very briefly about both Transportation for America and Smart Growth America and our arts and culture team. I've had an arts and culture team now for just over 3 years. I've been on staff for almost exactly 3 years to the date, I think, as of this week. Run a number of different programs. We have a new fellowship program I encourage you all to look into as well, known as the Arts, Culture, and Transportation Fellowship. We have funded a number of different programs around the country over the years. We've run our own conference called the Intersections Conference, which we'll be bringing back next year at a to-be-named location, to-be-named date, as well as a whole bunch of other training programs around the United States as well. So I encourage you to visit our website or our umbrella organization, which is Smart Growth America, and check out the Arts and Culture program there. Much of the work we do really grew out of work we did with Danya and ArtPlace America, which led to the creation of a field scan on arts, culture, and transportation. Hopefully many of you have seen this field scan on our website, had a chance to read through it, see all the animations and all the different typologies, the 7 challenges and 7 solutions that we feel that artists are contributing to solving up on our website. If you haven't, I encourage you to look at that, especially as you put together your applications to submit to us. This is really the framework through which we think a lot about how artists can be involved in working on transportation projects, what the value of that work is, and the value of that collaboration really is. I encourage you all to take a look at that as well. So we're here today to talk about artist in residence programs, and while we've, of course, talked about how our program in Minnesota and our program in Washington State are the first artist in residence programs at state agencies, of course, artists working with government agencies is not a new phenomenon. It's been going on for quite a while, and going on it's really its modern form, starting in New York in the 70s with Merle Ukele's in the Department of Sanitation out there in New York. If you're not familiar with her work, I encourage you to look into that as well. She's been an unpaid artist in residence ever since the 70s. It's still technically on staff there within the New York City Department of Sanitation. It's done a number of different projects, social practice projects that have ranged from ballets involving sanitation trucks to this touch sanitation performance you see on the screen now, in which she took it upon herself to meet everybody working for the department during her first couple of years in that role. And of course, those of you who are joining us from the Twin Cities probably know that both St. Paul and Minneapolis have had artist in residence programs over the years. Public Art St. Paul and the City of St. Paul launched, of course, the City Artist program in St. Paul, and the Creative City Making program is run in Minneapolis. Collaboration between intermedia arts and the city there, as well as in rural communities up in Fergus Falls, run by Springboard for the Arts, the Hinge Arts Residency. So great local precedents for doing this kind of work at the local level as well. We've also been tracking around the country a number of programs that have brought artists into municipal departments of transportation, and spent a lot of time working with the first artist in residence, Alan Nakagawa, who was an artist in residence at the Los Angeles Department of Transportation. And I mentioned this at least partially because this is one of my favorite headlines from a couple of years ago, why you should stick your hand in this mystery box at the bus stop. This is one of the projects he did while working with LADOT a couple of years ago. The Chattanooga Department of Transportation, as some of you might have seen, just announced that they are also taking on an artist in residence, have an open call as well. And there are other municipal DOTs out there working in this way to bring a creative approach to the work that they're doing on a day-to-day basis. But of course, we're here to talk about the state program with Minnesota. So I wanted to spend the next couple minutes before I hand things off really getting into the nitty-gritty, the details of how the program is structured, what the application process looks like, how we're going to decide on who we're actually going to bring on to be the artist in residence, the schedule for what that'll look like, and how you can then go about applying. So what we see here is the team Like I mentioned, we have Danya from Art Place America and Jessica from MnDOT. I myself am representing Transportation for America. We have another team that's part of the Smart Growth America family called the State Smart Transportation Institute. They're based out in Madison, Wisconsin. They work with a number of different state DOTs around the country, and they'll really be supporting the artists throughout the course of the residency, but especially at the beginning, getting the artists prepared to enter into a state DOT and understanding what it is that state DOTs do. The artist in residence who comes on board will be based in St. Paul, Minnesota, where MnDOT's headquarters are, with some travel around Minnesota, as well as some conferences and convenings throughout the country. One of the great things from my perspective about this program is that it's starting at almost the same time as a very similar program in Washington State. That artists will be based out in Olympia, Washington. And so there'll be an opportunity to collaborate across those two states and to learn from one another. And there will be some travel out to Washington State, and artists from Washington State will then come to Minnesota as well. So I won't walk through each of these in details. These are really the primary tasks. A lot of this program is honestly somewhat amorphous. We don't know exactly what the artists will do. That's really part of what the artist tasks will be at the start. There'll be regular check-ins with the team. Those of us on this webinar, speaking on this webinar, are part of the team, as well as a few other folks at SSTI and others as well. I mentioned meeting with Washington State DOTs, artists in residence too. The position is a half-time position, so be working roughly 20 hours a week. Be expected to track work hours and project expenses just like any other similar kind of project. As a national organization, I should say it's Transportation for America being a national organization, we're of course interested in working with MnDOT and having the best possible program in Minnesota, but we're also really interested in spreading this approach to other states around the country, since we of course work across the United States. So there's an important component that is related to tracking the progress, documenting what actually goes into this work, and helping us explain to other states why this is beneficial and what actually happened throughout the year. That's the last two bullet points there, just explaining what the lessons learned were from this to other folks looking to take similar approaches to the work. So selection criteria, I'll start with the last one first. Insatiable curiosity. We're really looking for somebody who wants to come in and get their hands dirty, really understand what it is that the thousands of people who work, not every single one of the thousands of people, but definitely many of the thousands of people who work for MnDOT do, what the role of MnDOT is within the state of Minnesota, figuring out ways in which artistic experience and artistic approach can benefit the work that MnDOT is trying to do on a day-to-day basis. We're looking for people to have a basic knowledge of what MnDOT does, so I encourage any of you who are planning to apply to read up on that. There's lots of information available online. Definitely don't have to have experience working for a state DOT or government agency at all, but at least some experience with collaborating with those kinds of agencies would be beneficial. Communication is really important. This is a position that's going to be working with people with a very wide, varied kinds of backgrounds, from engineers to planners to policy folks as well. And then, of course, perhaps not surprisingly, the artistic merit of the portfolio you'll submit is a really important component for deciding on who we're actually going to pick. Budget, this is all available on our website, as you mentioned, but we are supplying a stipend to the artist of $40,000 plus an additional $9,000 that we feel is really set aside for fringe benefits for the artist to purchase health insurance or put into a retirement account or whatever the artist decides makes sense. There's $25,000 above and beyond that goes towards creating a project or projects. That could be towards materials. It could be towards any number of different things. And that's something that after the first 4 months of the project, after the rotations end, the artist will then decide how that money will be used with the committee that's overseeing the project. And then there's also additional funds to cover travel. We don't expect the artist to pay out of pocket to go out to Washington or to go to conferences in DC and other places like that, or even around the state, as the case may be. So there's some money set aside in the budget to cover those expenses too. This is kind of an abbreviated version of the schedule. Of course, are past the first bullet point. The call was released a few weeks ago. Deadline is coming up on May 1st. Hopefully you're all aware of that. We are going to then spend the months of May and June reviewing those applications, scheduling interviews, calling up references, and deciding on the selected artists definitely by the end of the month of June. with a tentative start date of July 29th. That's when we're aiming for the residency to begin. Just so you know, the program out in Washington is starting just a week before that, so they're only slightly staggered. First 4 months, as I mentioned, is set aside for rotations through a number of different divisions within MnDOT. Some of us will be out on site in Minnesota, helping the artists navigate that process. We'll have regular check-ins each month, and perhaps more often as the case may be, as well as quarterly in-person meetings. And the whole program wraps up roughly a year after it begins the following June. Application process is pretty straightforward. It's all on our website. I realize putting this up on the screen, but I should mention that, yes, we do ask for more information besides just your name and email and phone. That's really just the start of that screen. You do have to scroll down and answer a whole bunch of different questions. So as much as we like to keep this a simple process, we are going to ask you for more information besides just that simple contact information. We feel the questions are pretty straightforward. It's a lot about your background. It's a lot about what you think what kind of support you think you'll need in a role like this, how you would go about approaching it. There's an option for attaching a portfolio. We highly recommend you put some thought into that and representing your work in an interesting way, in a way that really reflects your approach to your work as well. It's one of those opportunities where you get to be a little bit more individualized. I encourage you to think that through too. This web page is on our website. The URL is kind of a long URL at the bottom of your screen right there, but if you Google Smart Growth America or Transportation for America and MnDOT Artist in Residence, you can definitely find it there. And if you're on our email list, you should have the link as well. That wraps up my part. I'm going to hand things off to Danya Sherman with ArtPlace, who is going to talk through ArtPlace America's role in this project.
Thank you, Ben. My name is Danya Sherman. Hello, everyone. Thanks for calling in. I am a senior consultant with ArtPlace America, where I've been working for the last 3 years. We are so thrilled and excited to be partnering with Transportation for America, with the Minnesota Department of Transportation, and with the State Smart Transportation Initiative, and making one of the first Artists in Residencies program at a state agency happen. I've seen how impactful Artists in Residence programs can be for the artists and for the agencies and constituents, and so just so excited to be bringing this work to be helping to support vibrant transportation systems and communities. So I just wanted to take a few minutes to speak about why ArtPlace is excited to support this program and a little bit more about our work over the past few years. So for those who don't know, ArtPlace America is a 10-year collaboration started in 2010 among a number of foundations, federal agencies, and financial institutions. And our mission is to position arts and culture as a core sector of community planning and development. We recognize that traditional community planning and development has not always led to communities being as equitable, healthy, and sustainable as they could be, and that's what we envision our work in working towards. So we have 4 lines of work. We are best known for our national grant program, the National Creative Placemaking Fund. We also have the Community Development Investments Fund, and this work, which is part of our research and field building work, which we connect people, organizations, and networks and try to share best practices, tools, and knowledge with practitioners to increase efficacy and understanding of creative community development work. Let me go back a minute. And within our research work, we developed what we call the Community Development Matrix, which breaks the community development sector into 10 areas, sort of align with how fields have become professionalized. Of course, we know that good projects work across all of these sectors and in all of these areas. But it's sort of to help us figure out how we can best support arts integration into each sector. And within each sector, we have been pursuing strategic partnerships, in this case with Transportation for America over the past few years. So as Ben mentioned, we work together on conducting a field scan, convened a working group, which we did in Indianapolis a few years back with a group of artists and transportation professionals, and have since been working together on developing resources so that the field of transportation broadly can understand better how to integrate arts and culture into its work to help it move forward, and what we can learn from different experiments in programs around the country. So I think we have another shot of the lovely field scan there. If you haven't read it, definitely recommend checking it out. And I think that's where I'll leave it for now, but happy to answer any other questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Danya. Two quick things I want to mention before I hand it off to Jessica to wrap us up. One, if any of you have any questions as you're listening, and hopefully you do, there's a chat box in the bottom left corner of your screen. You can type a message there. And Sophie Schoenfeld is the other half of my arts and culture team. Will then read some of those out to us at the end. Also wanted to thank, of course, ArtPlace for funding both this program and our program out in Washington, as well as to thank McKnight Foundation for funding this program in Minnesota, and MnDOT itself for funding the program too. As a great segue over to Jessica, who is the Highway Sponsorship Director for Minnesota Department of Transportation. I'll let her tell us a little bit more about MnDOT and what she sees coming out of this program. So Jessica, please take it away.
Sure. Thank you so much, Ben. Thank you all for having us. We're so excited to be part of this pilot and this pioneering program. It's a big deal for MnDOT, and we couldn't be more excited. We're at the stage of really, reflecting on our culture and how we deliver the transportation system, and how MnDOT can really elevate the aesthetic and environmental and social and cultural values of community within the transportation system and within a transportation project. So, we are just incredibly excited. And my interest, I work at the central office of MnDOT. MnDOT is split up into districts across the state, and I am in the Office of Land Management. I'm started with MnDOT about a year or so ago to create public-private partnerships to really enhance the work that we do across the state. So I'm very excited to be at the table and to really work with this artist and help us learn from Smart Growth and learn from WashDOT and really evaluate how we can integrate an artist perspective into the work that we do. So a little bit about MnDOT more broadly. MnDOT is a very large state agency. We have nearly 5,000 employees across the state. MnDOT is the second largest landowner. We have 175,000 acres of highway, roadsides, and land, and right-of-way is really what we call it, across the state. But our activities are incredibly diverse. I think sometimes the public doesn't know the full depth and breadth of our activities, but we have oversight and coordination with rails, with airports, over 100 airports across the state, nearly 12,000 miles of highway lanes, ports, all sorts of transit, just a huge range of different activities, supporting all different forms of multimodal transportation and activities. Really, the diversity of what we do is really pretty significant. And as Ben mentioned, we have professionals in the traditional sort of transportation area, professionals and engineers, but we also have tons of planners and surveyors and public engagement professionals, all sorts of folks that are helping us really think through how we deliver the transportation system. So we're very excited to work with you all and figure out a way to think through some of the cultural kind of questions. So on the next slide, our multimodal transportation system, we are really thinking through really long-term vision for how we deliver a system that elevates the health of our people, the environment, and the economy across the state and really internationally. And through a visioning process that really began in 2010 under a former commissioner, we're really thinking and kind of taking a step back in the last 10 years and trying to be really intentional around the investments that we make in the transportation system and how our values are reflected within our work. And we really are utilizing these frameworks to guide our investment decisions and our policies through kind of our family of plans and how we influence mobility across the state. So our family of plans, as you can kind of see, we're really thinking through every aspect of that, whether that's transit, bike, ped, our highway system, how we support freight, which is a huge part of how our economy runs in the state of Minnesota through freight, and of course our aviation, rail, and other parts that really are also part of a thriving economy across our state. So we're really being intentional about the modes and all of those needs. And our strategic vision, next slide, Mr. Stone, is really around our operating plan is intending to help us think through how we invest in our people, how we support operational excellence and how we deliver our system across the state, and how we improve relationships with the communities that we serve. We have a renewed focus on equity and how we are really ensuring that what we deliver is in the highest way possible reflective of the diverse communities that we serve, understanding how transportation impacts communities in different ways, really working to reduce disparities, and really thinking through how we serve our customers. So that's sort of the operational and strategic framework of our work environment. Of course, safety is the number one priority of how we deliver our transportation systems. But I think that MnDOT is a pretty vibrant environment for looking for innovative solutions, having an ethic of continuous improvement to really ensure that we are doing the best that we can. So the next slide, then, is really a community connections framework that I think is also instructive of how we're thinking. So the Federal Highway Administration, FHWA, has helped state DOTs across the country think through how we understand the impact of transportation, our infrastructure is your neighborhood, how we do elevate the values of the diverse communities that we serve, how are we responsive and incorporating input very significantly in the solutions that we're providing for communities, how can we build those deeper relationships to improve the outcomes of our projects, and really embrace technology and innovation and flexibility in a way that honors an equity vision and is really creative. So I think that this framework, the Community Connections framework, is very instructive of our vision for the artists and residents. And we really hope to have the artists help us kind of look at our culture, look at how do we serve communities? How do we elevate the assets and character of the communities that we serve within our projects? How do we respond to the requests for art and placemaking within our right-of-way? Really helping us kind of understand deeply, I want the artists to understand deeply our priorities and then be able to help ask some of those kind of cultural questions and public engagement and how we engage disadvantaged voices and the other populations in what we do is really important. We have a big public engagement vision, and the public engagement department and vision is a big part of how the artists will be integrated into MnDOT and otherwise understand how we really seek to elevate the voices of the community within our transportation system. So while I could just drone on forever, I think there's exciting things that the artists will get to be a part of. We have the former Governor Dayton called a task force for connected and autonomous vehicles. So MnDOT is really trying to think about the future of the transportation system. And so this person, one of the rotations we'll go through is with our connected and autonomous vehicles team to understand sort of those future visions of transportation. But we also have sort of other problems, I shouldn't say problems, other opportunities to be part of this question on our sort of sustainability discussions, our vision for equity, our vision for how we integrate community voices into all of our work, as I mentioned, a vision that is absolutely multimodal and understands context-sensitive sort of approach to how we deliver our work. And we're always looking for how we can create innovative relationships to leverage resources and build a stronger partnership with communities across the state, not just the Twin Cities, but very much in greater Minnesota, and in a way that will support the work of our districts that they do every day. So that was very fast, Ben. I hope we're still okay on time. And with that, we're excited to be part of this collaboration, and I look forward to the ongoing dialogue with artists that apply. Thanks, Ben. I'll turn it back over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Jessica. So this is now time for questions, and hopefully if we can figure them out, answers to your questions. So please use the bar in the bottom left of your screen to submit your questions, and Sophie, I'll let you read them out to us.
Sure. So the first question is, how would you characterize success in this position?
Jessica, do you want to try to take that one first, and I can weigh in?
Sure. Sure. I think the success will be, deeply understanding our priorities and our operations in a way that will make recommendations that are really actionable. We're really excited to think of how the artist recommendations can support really process enhancements and really have a direct impact of their vision on our work. So I think success is really that deep immersion experience and understanding our priorities and helping us think through creative ways of really meeting those needs and improving our outcomes.
Sounds pretty good to me. I think the only thing to add, and I mentioned this earlier, that we're really excited to have somebody document what works and what doesn't work. I often feel like we, as an organization, myself as a person, learn just as much from things that don't go well as things that go really well. So we, of course, want everything to go really well, but we also want people to be honest about the things that don't work. And we anticipate doing this again, potentially in other DOTs. So love to learn how this works for the artists who selected and really come up with a good set of recommendations for shifting things in whatever way we need to as we move into the future and do this again.
Great. Thank you both. Another question is whether or not the artists and residents will need to produce a public piece of work as part of the residency.
I can answer that one. Short answer is no. It's a good question and something that's come up a lot from other folks I've talked to out in Washington and Minnesota as well. This is a project in which the final outcome may or may not look like what we would all identify as a work of art, whether that's a sculpture or a written work of art or some other kind of piece. It might very well be a report. It might be a set of recommendations that come in some other form. The art side of things is really more focused on the process to get there. It's not necessarily focused on what the end outcome is. It could very well be recommendations for MnDOT's public art policy rather than the creation of a work that is created through that policy, if that makes sense. I don't know if Danya or Jessica has anything else they want to add.
What you said, Ben, really resonates with me about the process piece, that it isn't about the outcome necessarily. It's about answering those questions and thinking through those elements. Yeah, exactly. The physical production of a piece of art or in the right-of-way isn't necessarily the outcome that we're seeking.
Great, thank you. Another question is if there are some case studies of past artists in residences and their work. If one of you, maybe Ben, if you could talk a little bit about what some of the outcomes of those projects have been.
Yeah, there's a number of different programs I mentioned before that have been documented. There's Alan Nakagawa in Los Angeles. There are definitely far more artist in residence programs that exist beyond those that are at DOTs. There's some in, as I mentioned, New York City Department of Sanitation, planning departments, public health agencies around the country. a couple organizations, national organizations that have written about this, and I know Danya's been tracking this, so I'll let her weigh in as well. But A Blade of Grass, an organization based out in New York, has been working on this subject matter and has written quite a bit about it. Focused on a number of different agencies. Americans for the Arts has also written quite a bit about it too. We, Smart Growth America, have also hosted in the past webinars. We had St. Paul's program, City Artist St. Paul program, focused in on one of those webinars. We had Alan Nakagawa on one of our webinars, so I recommend looking into our library, both of blog posts in the past and webinars, as well as a field scan, which has some of those programs discussed in it. Danya, do you know of other resources that point to some of the outcomes of these artist residencies?
No, I think those are the main ones that I would have pointed out as well. The thing I'll say, as I've been studying it a little bit, is just that I feel like these, from what I've understood, artist in residence programs that are at agencies or organizations really vary. And so I think it's important, to make sure that the outcomes of this one are thought about separately from what the other ones may have been, because I think in each case the host has different goals. So I think it's good to look at cases, but I also just want to say, asterisk that while they all may be called artists in residencies, that they really vary depending on what the goals are of the host. And that, just to note that, I think typically often artist in residency programs are seen, or historically, I guess, have been used to call sort of studio-based art practices where an artist can come and use space and have time to create work, and that this is something really different, as Jessica and Ben have talked about. So just to add those two thoughts.
Yeah, it's a great point. Just to echo that a little bit, a lot of historic, and many people listening probably know this, a lot of the historic artist residencies that have existed are more about removing a person from society in a way and putting them on a ranch or in a somewhat remote location so they can get away from the distractions of modern life and focus on creating their work. This is essentially the opposite of that. It's taking you and throwing you into a very complex agency focused on all kinds of different projects, so you can really use that as source material for creating work and recommendations.
Great. We have another question about the specific opportunities that the artists in residence will have in helping shape some of these transportation goals and ultimately outcomes.
Jessica, do you want to take that one?
I'm not sure I understand the question of, how will they help shape goals for the transportation system, or?
Yeah, I wonder if it'd be helpful to talk a little bit about.
Sorry.
No worries. I think it may be just helpful to talk a little bit about maybe the structure of the residency and what opportunities the artists will have to interact with different kind of key players at the agency to help kind of shape what that residency goal and will actually kind of look like.
Sure. I think I can speak sort of broadly to that. I think the way that Smart Growth and Ben have set up the residency serve as a series of rotations with various departments. So we envision that the artists in residence spend a week to 2 weeks, 2 weeks in each kind of critical offices and departments to really understand the priorities of those areas. And so this could be will be a couple of the offices that come to mind where the person will spend time, our bridge office, our office of maintenance to really understand where the rubber meets the road and how we do the work we do, our office of environmental stewardship, which MnDOT has archaeologists and wildlife biologists and experts in water and contamination and you name it to really understand the environmental picture. They'll be housed out of the Office of Land Management, which has a huge range of functions from surveying to mapping to our kind of real estate picture to just a huge range of activities, to really deeply understand that side of our business. but also our connected and autonomous vehicle section, our active transit and sort of bike ped section. So, we've really tried to have a very active cross-section of some priorities to help us weave together a vision where art and placemaking can really enhance, and a creative vision can enhance how we deliver services and how we work with communities. So our public engagement section, our tribal affairs section, Greater Minnesota District. So all of those are areas where the artist will have a chance to be embedded and understand deeply their priorities. So some of our priorities are set statutorily through some of our visions for our statewide plans and some of those elements, but helping really understand and shape priorities and figure out how we can braid and weave those together to improve outcomes and make recommendations around that. It was a really powerful way to improve outcomes for the work that we do. Sort of a verbose answer to a simple question. I hope that answered that individual's question.
I'll just add one quick thing. It was a great answer. That if you are listening in and your head is spinning a little bit at all the many, many things that MnDOT does, that's totally fine. That's part of what the rotations are all about. And just so we're clear, we're not anticipating that the artist comes in, learns about all these different projects, and makes recommendations and creates projects for all of them. We think that would have to be, a 10-year residency, which is not what we have set up. So it's really about figuring out what makes the most sense. And some artists will, based on their own practice, it'll make more sense for them to focus on one or two or three of these different projects and divisions versus others. So it's really about figuring out where the right kind of point of investment or point of intersection with other different people working for MnDOT would be.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you for putting a finer point on that, Ben. I think that's a great way of describing that. It isn't, I think it's looking for those opportunities for those artistic interventions that could be, looking at the system more globally across our culture and things that if we invest in, for instance, the capacity of our project managers to understand, a little bit more around art and placemaking, what can that look like? Then we can help support those folks who do the work across the state, in communities across the state. That's a great investment of our capacity and our vision.
Great, thank you. One other good question is if any of you all have any advice for the application process.
I can go first. Get it in by the deadline. That's sort of an obvious first piece of advice that, of course, not everyone always follows, but I highly recommend that you do that and get it in even before the deadline if you're able. I'd say, having gone through similar processes in the past, the things that are always really helpful are focusing a lot on the work that you've done and how that work, even if it isn't specifically working for a DOT, but how that work was done in a way and through a process that seems transferable to this kind of work. And by that I mean not necessarily just showing an image or describing what the final outcome is, but really talking about what the process was behind it and how you, as an artist, approach the work that you create, and really explaining what your role is and what your partner's role is. We understand how you got involved or other people were up to and how you then related with those different kinds of people and built a team or became part of a team to create some sort of meaningful change in transportation system or housing system or any number of other different things. I think that's really important to not just necessarily show us great images or describe final projects, but really focus a lot on the process. I think that's probably my most important piece of advice. And the other, I guess, somewhat obvious thing is just make sure you at least have a somewhat decent understanding of MnDOT, even beyond what we're talking about and what Jessica's been talking about today, but really dive into everything that's available online, understand what it is that MnDOT cares about, what it is that MnDOT is responsible for, and what some of the goals and priorities are. Tanya and Jessica, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think that helps. Points.
Great. So one more question is if you could go into a little bit more specifics on what the funding for the $25,000 project-specific funding will cover.
Yeah, it's very much up in the air. It's hard to really say exactly what we'll cover until we see what the selected artist comes up with. There really aren't, well, I shouldn't say there aren't restrictions. I'm sure we can think of some restrictions and some things that wouldn't be applicable, but for the most part, except for a couple things, it's really totally open-ended, and it could be used to acquire materials, it could be used to get the software that one needs, it could be used for additional travel if that is required. It could be used to hire other people that are needed to work on a project, a designer or something like that. It's pretty flexible, and it's really meant to be part of a collaborative process in which the artist doesn't just disappear and spend the money and then come to us with the final piece, but rather work through what the project should be and talks with us about how they anticipate spending the money, gives us a budget, us being the committee overseeing this, so all of us on the phone and a couple other folks as well. And then through that process determines how the money should be spent. I'm just getting word that those are all the questions. I'll pause just for maybe 10 seconds, and if you have any more questions, this is your last chance to send them in. You can also, of course, email us after the fact. Contact information. My contact information is on our website and on the application page too. And if anything was said during this webinar that you didn't get a chance to jot down notes about quickly enough, we're going to put this up online in the next couple of days. And if you're on the webinar, or if you RSVP'd for the webinar in the past, you'll get an email to that link, so you'll have a chance to do it, to listen to it after that. So if you have any last questions coming in, or are we good to go?
I think we're good to go. Oh, actually, one just came in. I think it's a good question. So we'll make this the last one, and people are welcome to follow up with us over email, which we'll be in touch with after the webinar. But this question is, are the working hours going to be set for the artist, or is it a pretty typical kind of 9 to 5? So that might be a tough one to answer, but I'll give it over to you all.
I think some of this we'll determine over the coming months as we lead up to the actual start date, but it won't be set 9 to 5 every day because it's only a half-time position. With Washington, I know I can't, of course, use Washington as an example for Minnesota. It's a different set of people and different requirements and all that. But working with the artists and staff at WashDOT there, we determined that half-time meant a few days, full days, meaning 9 to 5 those days, and then a few days off over the course of the entire project. But really it'll depend on what's going on and how the rotations shape up and what the project looks like. But it's not a Monday through Friday 9 to 5 position, because that would be a full 40 hours. It's really meant to be half that. But I don't know exactly what those hours will be yet, and I'm hoping that it can be a collaboration and a decision we make with the selected artist. And I think that wraps us up. I'm not seeing any other questions come in. So I just wanted to thank Danya, thank Jessica for joining us and participating in the webinar today, and thank all of you who tuned in live today and anyone who's listening after the fact. Final reminder that the deadline for this project is May 1st, coming up in just a few weeks, so I encourage you to get to work. And if you have any questions in the meantime, feel free to send us an email, and we'll